in the booth, so I hope you can hear me. I think we're going to be able to project. You can hear me, yes?
Yes.
Great. Please join me in welcoming to the stage co-director behind Fire in Paradise, Dre Cooper. Along with subjects from the film, Beth Bowersox, the dispatcher that we just saw, and school teacher Mary Ludwig. Please join us in welcoming them to the stage.
And I would also like you to join me in welcoming director Alexander A. Mora from the Nightcrawlers. We have a mic for Alex. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and start with some questions, and then we will be opening this up to the audience. I want you to be seen. I'll start with, the two films, both Dre and Alex, and this is still really awkward. Both of you have, you're telling incredible stories. They're very different in many ways, but they go behind, and a deep dive behind the headlines, right, that we hear in news stories, and really give the human side of what's been going on in these different places. And so, Dre, if you could, we're almost a year anniversary of the campfire, and I'm curious, and Paradise, and if you could talk about the beginning of this, when this film started for you, and how close to the fire when you started filming. If you could take us back to then.
Yeah.
You could hold the mic up as well. I think they're working.
Yeah. So, almost 1 year ago, on the day, on November 8th, I picked up my kids from school, and we were going home, and smoke was already filling the skies in the Bay Area. And I got a call that afternoon from my mom, and she said, Paradise is gone. To turn on the news. And so I went and I turned on the news, and it was sort of everywhere that this town that I visited as a kid was gone. My grandparents had retired there. I used to go there as a kid. My aunt got married in their backyard, so I had this relationship to this place. My grandparents had since passed before the fire, but it hit home, and so it was shortly thereafter where my partner Zach and I decided that we should go sort of see what was happening, and how people were getting on, and what had essentially taken place that day.
And how soon after did you start filming with those members of the community since the fire, that timeline?
We got there on Thanksgiving Day. The smoke got so bad in the Bay Area that my family and I went to stay with some friends. And a friend from high school is married to a firefighter, and so, it's all we talked about for those 2-3 days. And he introduced me to some of his friends who were actually up there, some other firefighters that were already on the scene doing the search and recovery. And so sort of through those relationships where doors started to open, and then Zach had met Captain Shawn Norman, and sort of throughout the course of a few days, Shawn Norman kind of opened the doors to the rest of the story, and everybody else that we met along the way.
And so for you, Alex, thank you for joining us as well. This is your first film that you've made, and quite an intense subject matter to tackle for that first project. And if you could take us to this story and what brought your attention to it, and then you kind of really tackling it from a filmmaker's perspective. You could take us back to then.
Yeah, sure. It wasn't at all intentional to sort of get involved in this film, and as always with these kinds of films, it was very sort of accidental, I guess. But one of my producers, can you hear me now? Okay. One of my producers, Darren Maddock, had spent some time in the Philippines, and so I think she has some ties to the Philippines over the years. And so when the story of the drug war broke out, she was following it online, and she came across the story of a young lady called Rowena Tiamson, who'd been murdered with a sign left on her saying, "I'm a drug user, do not copy me." And it turns out she was actually innocent. It was some sort of love triangle thing. And I think she was so moved by the injustice of that story, because what she felt that kind of story wasn't really getting over to the West, the story of these individual stories. It was generally a more broad sort of coverage of the drug war. And so she wanted to tell us a very simple story about this young woman. So at the time, I'd worked at the UN and for human rights journals in various capacities as well, and also I had a creative background in architecture. So she kind of asked if I would direct it. I didn't have any experience in directing, so I sort of flatly refused, and she was quite persistent. And so, eventually I acquiesced, and we kind of went out there. But we wanted to tell a very small story about this young lady. A short iPhone film about it. But I think I guess we had a lot of incredible access immediately. We met Rafi. He was the first person we met when we were out there, and he was very generous with his. He kind of invited me over on a night shift a couple of nights after. And that night, I think it was like 15 people or so were murdered, across the city, and these car chases, and it was the most unreal experience of my life. And so that was an inflection point. I think it was quite clear that was where the drug war was developing, and so that's where it kind of pivoted the focus a little bit from there.
I mean, as you mentioned, if it's starting as such a simple story, your film is so complex that there's many stories wrapped up in that. And can you talk about that and that approach and the time that it took to kind of gain, the trust of those people that are involved on different sides of this war?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges about this film was sort of being able to, be able to grapple with the various nuances of the story. And I think one of the first things that we certainly felt when we went out there was that, from a Western's perspective, it was quite self-evident what was right and what was wrong about what was happening. It was, it's quite, you don't have to argue that killing people who are using drugs is wrong. But the president did and still does have, an approval rating in the upper 70s, between the upper 70s and 80s. And still does. And so it was quite clear that something else was going on, which I had taken for granted. So I guess it became an issue with, well, there's a disjuncture between what I was expecting and what was actually happening. Right. And so I guess the way the structure came from this idea that a lot of people supported what the vigilantes were doing. There was a sense that everyday people were going out and killing people, and people supported it. And they were treated like heroes in a way. And so there's a split, there's a very binary situation where it was just like, these guys are the good guys to some people, and these guys are the good guys to some people. So I guess sort of treating them simultaneous heroes and bad guys. I firmly believe that instead of being a very didactic film, I would sort of train the camera on both sides, and the truth would kind of eventually emerge, hopefully, and it did, luckily, so, yeah.
And in that complexity, there's an added layer too, is that the vigilantes and the group are also wearing masks. We never see them. And can you talk about that process of getting close with those that you want to in some ways expose, but yet they themselves are not allowing to be exposed, and really kind of allowing themselves to have a barrier between themselves and the camera?
Yeah, I think that's. I guess it was sort of like an editorial decision. More than anything, I wanted to avoid blurring out faces. I felt like it would take people out of the film, and I kind of wanted people to sort of be submerged into into what was happening. And so, luckily, there was this sort of emerging trope about men, masked gunmen, kind of appearing on bikes, and that's generally how they operate. And so I just thought, just really take that and just make it a more obvious, sort of symbol of who they were. Right. Actually, I was actually more insistent on because there were certain times where they wouldn't, they didn't actually care. I think the leader sees himself as something of on a sort of a religious crusade of sorts, and so he wasn't in any way sort of mindful about, something like he would sometimes have his shirt off and he has all these very distinctive tattoos, and right. I would tell him to cover it up, and then he would say no, and it doesn't matter, and so it was this really strange relationship where I was fighting to sort of keep that anonymity in a way. So that was very bizarre. But yeah, certainly I think one of the main concerns was that that visage would, in some senses, be romanticized in a way but that was the only way we could deal with concealing, their identity sufficiently, but also getting that story organically.
Absolutely, and as we talked about, like the performative aspect of it as well, right? When you enter a mask into that space. In thinking about trauma and kind of how everyone within these films are, and in real life, are dealing with it, I do want to thank both Mary and Beth for joining us today and sharing your story. I think it's so incredible to hear from those of you that were there. And if you could both talk about that experience, kind of, we definitely see it and how emotionally open and available you are on screen, but being approached by Zachary and Dre and kind of being willing to tell your story, could you take us back to that when you were approached by the filmmakers?
Well, I found it very easy to open up to Dre and Zach. We met at a school in a classroom, and I spent about 2 hours, Abby and I were together, and she went first and then I went, and I thought I'd be able to stay stoic, but he asked some good, deep questions, starting with my childhood. I've lived there all my life. I was raised there, and so my father was actually a teacher down here, and he ended up in Paradise. He got a job in Biggs, and that was the school I ended up at. So he just touched on all those deep emotions, and it doesn't show, but he asked me about conversations on the bus with children and the real minute details of that journey. And so it felt like a safe place to open up. And I actually have told many people that, and I've told you, that Zach and Dre were a big part of my healing through that trauma and that strength, because I've been interviewed before, but the way they did it was with great care, great sensitivity, and a lot of compassion and support. So it was greatly appreciated.
I second 100% what you said. I was interviewed by Zach, and I remember thinking, oh, it's been a month, it's been 2 months. I remember it was around Christmas. And I thought, I'm over this, right? I should be over this. And I told Zach, I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna be as emotional as maybe you want me to be, because I cried about it in a little bit, and then just reliving the day, and I just started sobbing, and I'm like, I'm so sorry, I'm ruining your film. And he was just so kind and, like you said, compassionate, where it was just a conversation. It wasn't, I'm not interviewing you, I'm not slamming these hard questions at you, just tell me what you went through, and just be with me in that moment. And it was very calming, and it was reliving it without that anxiety and without as much hurt as kind of I think I had been up to that point. But it definitely brought back, it made me realize I'm not over this, and I'm not gonna be for a while. Still not over it. So.
Well, thank you. Dre, I'm curious about as well, a lot of the footage that you gathered for the film and how you were able to access a lot of that, not being there the day of. If you could talk about your and Zachary's approach to gathering all of that and putting it together to tell the story.
Yeah, and then just to add to what Beth and Mary were talking about, I think this is what's, can be so powerful about documentary. It's just this process of the interview. It can be a therapeutic dynamic, and oftentimes we're talking to people who, have gone through, in your case, these horrific experiences, or, they're sort of at the bottom of some of their life experiences, and I think the medium itself sort of allows for that kind of opportunity to sort of open up and process in some ways, and so I thank you guys all for allowing that to happen. With respect to the material, when we showed up there, it wasn't clear to us, exactly what story we were going to tell. We dropped in on what was essentially the largest search and recovery effort in California history, after what has become now the deadliest fire in California history. And so, we weren't sure if we were going to tell the story of the search and recovery effort, or were we going to, tell the story of a rebuilding effort. And I think, within a few weeks, it started to become pretty clear. Everybody we met, was still in such shock, right? And everybody said, look, let me tell you what happened to me on that day. On that day, this day was like no other day, right? And 40,000 people experienced this. So we're not talking about a couple hundred or a couple thousand. Nearly 40,000 people on that day, on that ridge, were trying to get out of that town. And people were spending 4, 5, 6, 7 hours on those roads. So it was no small situation, right? And so to hear some of these firefighters like Shawn Norman talk about, look, I've been doing this for 30 years, and in the last 5 years, I've had a completely different career. And on that day, he's never seen anything like that. That's fire behavior he's never seen. And so, everybody who we spoke to, most of whom, Mary included, said, look, let me show you what I saw. And so, Mary showed us the photos. You see her in her interview, she's showing us the photos from the bus. And so a lot of people, had collected, they'd taken photos, or they'd taken some clips, some video clips, or they had friends or family members, and they were just like, look, let me just show you what this was. Because this is something that you never could imagine being in yourself. This is on the very edge of what's possible to imagine, right? In your own human experience. And so I think in that was this power. And so, it became clear to us that the story we were going to tell was the story of that day and what these people went through and how they got out. And I think what is miraculous is that, more people didn't perish in that fire. It's a testament to, the will of each one of these people who were involved in it, right? That they made it out. And so, I think that's what
We'd like to open this up to questions from the audience, and if you could please make sure to phrase as a question and not simply as a comment. But I'm sure we have some questions from the audience. Yes,
Right here.
I am curious what it was like to watch this film a year later.
so the question was around perhaps for Mary and Beth to watch this film a year later, what that was like.
Actually, Shawn Norman, I've known him since I was 14, when I was a junior firefighter way back in the day. And he called me, he was supposed to be here, but his team got activated to the fire down in Ventura. And so he called me on Friday and he said, probably gonna wanna watch it before you go. And the first time I watched it, I felt just numb. It was just, my body just said, nope. And I watched it, I hit replay, and I was like, I'm gonna watch it again. And then it was just, everything came flooding back. And part of it was, that day I worked a 36-hour shift. I was up for about 48 hours because of the fire. But I was in a box. I was in this room with 6, 7 other people, and I could see the smoke, and I was getting text messages, and I had an idea, but I didn't know really what they were going through out there. And to see that, yeah, I had to pause it at a couple places because you have an idea, but until you see it, you just sit there and go, you can't know. And even watching it, an ounce of understanding of what people went through that day. And it's hard to watch, but it's good to know more of an understanding of what people experienced.
I had to watch it before too. I think, I had great trust, so I knew that it would be something that we'd all be proud of in Paradise. We both still live there. It's our community. I think watching it was hard. It made me feel like we're putting our schools back together. We're trying to rebuild. So you see a lot of strength in the film, and so I think it helps propel that healing momentum for me. And so, and I emailed Zach. I just wanted to give her a hug. I just wanted to give everybody, hugs. It made me feel that way, especially Joy. But it touched me. And you see, as someone that was on the bus, I watched so many, not just firemen, but policemen, ambulance drivers, going the opposite way in ditches, around trees to get to people. And it was something we pointed out to the children on the bus. Look, you just have packed cars trying to get out, and all these people going the other way. So so it's really nice to see in the film a full picture of families and law enforcement officers and firemen, and how everything is kind of layered upon each other to tell the story of everyone that day. So it just it makes me proud of my hometown and thankful for those who served that day.
There was another question right up here. We got time for one more. Yes.
Well, first of all, Dre, I want to compliment you because I felt like I was in that fire watching that movie. I was having, like, literally feeling panicked and just really feeling the trapped way that you must have felt. So wow, you did a great job, number one. I'm just curious how the children are doing.
Question was around how the children are doing.
Well, I think they're pretty resilient. I ended up having several children from the bus ride. I know I have kids, there's kids that escaped in cars that had tremendous stories. But we have counselors on hand, we have wonderful staff, support staff, administrators, and so the children in Paradise have been a main priority to help heal. We've done music and art and dancing and those wonderful things that help heal. Actually, the Royal Ballet from San Francisco came and worked. Yes, Royal, and man, he was great. And so just working hard to make those connections so kids feel safe and feel loved and are learning in addition to that. So I think kids are pretty strong. So they inspire me.
Well, thank you all for joining us today and for sharing stories of really humans doing extraordinary things given the circumstances that they are in. So please, one more round of applause for Everyone might have questions still for them, but if you could please exit the theater and they will probably meet you outside.